in a really good position in that group of challengers. That's it.
Still scoreless in the Premier League game between Leicester and Brighton, 72 minutes gone. But let's talk tennis, because the world number one Novak Djokovic today tested positive for COVID-19. To discuss this, I'm joined on the line by Ben Rothenburg, writer for the New York Times and host of the NCR Tennis Podcast. Evening, Ben.
Evening, Nathan. How are you doing?
So this news emerged earlier today that Djokovic, the latest tennis player playing at his own tournament, to test positive for COVID-19. This is the Adria Tour, which Djokovic set up really to kickstart and restart tennis again, which has, like all sports, been suspended for the last few months. But it's been played in a extremely and surprisingly relaxed atmosphere. No social distancing, packed houses, crowd-wise, no masks on the crowd. And the players, it seems, just hanging out together wherever and whenever they wanted. We showed some video a little bit earlier on of them in a nightclub together, dancing together. There's footage of them playing basketball to get their arms around each other. And it's in no way surprising to anybody that both Djokovic and his wife have ended up testing positive, because the likes of Grigor Dimitrov, Borna Coric, Viktor Trotsky, who Djokovic played, have also tested positive. It's all a bit of a mess.
Yeah, no, and the sad thing is that it's completely expected in a lot of ways. As soon as the images started coming out of the Adria Tour event, everyone else in the world was really taken aback, I think, by how not pandemic-y this looked. I mean, it didn't look like it was a completely different universe from the sort of world of social distancing and caution that we've all been trying to live in over this past time. And it all seemed incredibly casual. It seemed like it was taking place in complete disregard for everything going on. And the people initially in Serbia were telling us, hey, no, Serbia's got this under control. You don't understand. It's totally different here. And for them to now reap all these consequences is obviously unfortunate, but it's also pretty predictable, because they're not out of the tunnel yet on this thing. There's still a lot to go. And this was just so different from every other sporting event we're seeing, with empty stands, from Korean baseball to German soccer to whatever it is. Sport events don't look like Adria Tour did, and it's for a reason, and they're paying a price for that.
If there is one positive, it reinforces in so many people's minds just how quickly and easily this virus can spread, because they started off in Belgrade, which is where the video from the nightclub is, but then it moved on to Croatia, where they had played and where they arrived. They were meant to go to Bosnia. The final two events of this tour have been cancelled. Just how much of this rests on Djokovic's shoulders? How involved was he in this tour and putting it all together?
He was definitely very involved. I mean, his brother was the tournament director of it. Georgi Djokovic was the appointed tournament director, and it was clearly driven around Djokovic's star power and starting off in his hometown of Belgrade. So it was clearly his event. At the same time, a lot of other players who were adults from other countries accepted and agreed to go, and that probably wasn't wise of any of them either. And they all went to the nightclub, went to the soccer game, went to the basketball game, did all the other sort of things that were not prudent, weren't wearing masks at any point during any of this. So Djokovic, it's his event, and I think he is starting to bear more responsibility for that. He came out with a statement a couple minutes ago that said we were wrong and it was too soon, sort of fully owning this. But yeah, it does, hopefully, if anything good comes out of it, it's a cautionary tale that shows that these athletes might feel invincible. They might think that they've weathered the storm, but they're not, and we haven't.
How big an impact is this going to have on the restart of tennis and the possibility of the US Open taking place in August? Will it have any impact?
It's tough to know yet. I mean, it's a lot of big players. These are big star players, and Djokovic and Dimitrov, who have tested positive, and Coric a little bit less so, but he's still a well-known top player. It might just cast doubt on the ability for tennis players to behave in responsible ways. We're not sure. I mean, the US Open, for what their plans were, they have very strict guidelines, or relatively strict guidelines, I will say, for what they want to do in the resumption of the tour. I don't know if what this doesn't do is inspire any confidence that tennis players are going to be responsible people you can trust to be on their best behavior during a pandemic. And maybe they'll all learn from the misdeeds of this Adria Tour group, but it could be tricky. I mean, it's not confidence inspiring, let's put it that way.
Maybe it's wrong to be connecting Djokovic's stance on a vaccination from a couple of months ago to this tournament and this tour going ahead. But have there been signs that, in general, he's had a relaxed attitude towards this virus?
I think Djokovic's health opinions and views are definitely probably part of this. I do think that he's been skeptical about the vaccine. It's been doing all sorts of odd pseudoscience things on his channel, bringing on weird gurus talking about being able to change water with positive thinking and crazy stuff like that. I think that it goes it's part of his larger thinking, I think it's fair to say. And the skepticism and the distrust of science and things like that did not do him any favors here.
Yeah, you might talk to us a little bit more then about that, about Novak Djokovic, the man, and the side of Novak Djokovic that we've seen an awful lot more of over the last few months, because there was the controversy around the vaccination, and he said that he was against vaccinations, and that was at the very early stage of the outbreak. And at the time, I remember, I think it was Amelie Mauresmo, the former world number one, saying that tennis shouldn't return until there was a vaccine. Now, that was probably at a time when there was a lot of, as it turns out, misplaced hope that we would have a vaccine in a matter of months. Djokovic said, personally, I'm against vaccination. Has he expanded on that comment at all? Is he now the poster boy for the anti-vaxxers, or was it a bit more nuanced than that, and actually some of what we were saying got lost in the story and the noise afterwards?
You know, he did follow it up, but he didn't really walk any of it back meaningfully. I think that he just sort of spoke and didn't say, no, I support vaccines or science or research or anything like that. I think it's a definite vague distrust that he's showing towards the scientific community and in various different ways. And so I don't think that will have changed. It's possible that getting this illness that he's contracted now, a positive test, will change his mind. Will make him wake up and realize, hey, you know, these diseases are real, especially if he starts feeling negative effects of this, which I hope he does not. But, you know, it can sometimes take firsthand experience for a skeptic to become a believer.
We've also seen his wife, Elena, who was also tested positive today, was putting up posts on Instagram over the last few weeks around the conspiracy theories that the virus could be spread by 5G technology. And we're talking about, as I say, alternative views. What we're seeing maybe once as alternative views, from self-diagnosing himself as a celiac and going gluten-free after smacking, it seems, some bread off his chest and deciding that this was one of the reasons he was having so many issues. Okay, maybe that's not at a massively extreme level, but this is. Has he crossed that line from alternative views to dangerous views?
I think he has, and I think that he's acknowledged that a bit in his post today. We'll see if this leads to a larger awakening. He says, you know, I apologize for the harm that the Adria Tour caused to people, because it did. It has made people sick who weren't otherwise going to be sick, and that's very frustrating, very disappointing. And yes, as much as he wants to believe in meditation or be a vegan or whatever other things he's doing that are alternative viewpoints that are not harmful to anybody, that's fine and great, and that's completely his prerogative to do. But when he started sort of preaching more things that can be misleading to people or dangerous to people during a pandemic, at a time when there's a lot of uncertainty about health and a lot of people wanting answers to things and not knowing things, so he's out there disseminating this misinformation is definitely not a positive thing for him to be doing with his considerable platform as the world number one. This is one of the greatest tennis players of all time.
So he has 17 major titles, and he's been the world number one and the dominant player over the last 2 or 3 years, and he had a spell of 4 or 5 years and earlier in his career, and again he was by far and away the best player in the world. Yet still, for most of his career, he's had to live in the shadows of Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal, and maybe because of that has been able to get away with these type of views and not really held to account. Within the tennis community, how's Djokovic been viewed through the years?
I think a lot of people have a lot of respect for him as an athlete, first and foremost, and he's a likable guy. I mean, he's a guy who's, I think, pretty friendly with people. I think people see him a bit as being a bit on his own planet sometimes with his views on things and his outside the box thinking, but not in a way that's harmful. I think people sort of, you know, when he talks to other players about his raw vegan diet or whatever, they don't think that he's causing any harm. They roll their eyes a bit, but that's about it. I think he kind of did turn a corner a bit during this pandemic in terms of more actively preaching things that could be actively just disinformation or harmful or easily disputed during a pandemic when health is more sensitive than usual. And I think he did do himself no favors with his reputation during this time, and I hope that he can turn a corner and recover that.
One of them that really stood out as being more on the dangerous side of things was when he had the founder of Symbiotica, which is a reasonably well-known wellness brand, on his Instagram conversation. And Djokovic claimed that the power of prayer could purify polluted water.
Yeah.
Have his rivals, have his contemporaries called him out on this at all?
Nick Kyrgios is one of the more outspoken guys, I think, has made fun of this a bit on social media. But overall, no, the other players haven't weighed in on this. And I think they're probably privately joking about it among themselves, I had to guess. But no, there hasn't been too much public rebuke. And we'll see. I mean, Novak is also, we mentioned, but he's president of the player council. There's Nick Kyrgios calling him boneheaded, so that fits in. But he is president of the player council, so he could be sort of recalled or asked to resign from that position potentially if the players no longer think he's a trustworthy representative of them after putting them in harm's way with this exhibition and all the other various dubious claims he's made.
Has there been any conversation around that, about him being taken out of that position?
I've heard a couple people complaining about him. I'm not sure what the machinations would be within the tour to do that. I can't remember a player council president ever sort of being forced out before. It's not, a standard elected office in a important political democracy sense, but we'll see if he still feels comfortable leading the players, or if the players still feel comfortable with him leading them. It could definitely be strained at this point.
How damaging has the last 3 months and the lack of competition been to tennis as a whole?
It's tough. I mean, it was going to be an really interesting year on the tour, with the sort of most slams race really heating up, with Federer at 20 and Nadal at 19 with a chance to tie probably at the French Open, and Djokovic charging up very quickly in third at 17 and could have won all four this year entirely. So this is a tough time for tennis to miss. Similarly, on the women's side, Serena Williams trying to get her 24th Grand Slam. Also, all these players are getting older, running out of time. So in that sense, it's a rough break for tennis. And financially, tournaments that aren't happening are losing a lot of money. And that's why there has been a lot of initiative from tournaments like the U.S. Open to try to think of any sort of protocols they can to try to make a comeback possible against the odds. It's tough. I mean, tennis is such a nightmare sport for a pandemic, because it's people from all over the world coming together and then changing cities every week within that. So you're constantly moving, constantly getting new places, new germs. And the tennis, I think, even though on the court it's pretty distant, two people standing, 30 meters apart from each other, it doesn't look like a bad social distancing sport. But the actual mechanisms of the tour and the way that's set up as a global sort of traveling circus of tennis is pretty daunting to try to fit that into a pandemic safe model.
So with all that in mind and the travel that's generally necessary on a tennis calendar, what is the plan for the remainder of the year?
Events are still tentatively on. The ATP is scheduled to come back, I believe, on August 10th in Washington, and then have two events held in New York, which would be the Cincinnati tournament. They're moving it from Cincinnati to New York to be at the same site as the U.S. Open to reduce a bit of the travel, and then have the U.S. Open in New York with no fans in attendance is the thought there. And then to theoretically move on to the other events in Europe and possibly in Asia as well, although we'll see. I mean, I think just now we're seeing news that there's an EU travel ban coming out that might restrict a bunch of countries that are still struggling with the virus from traveling to EU countries. And so that would include France, where the French Open is trying to be held in early October. But I don't know if you can have a Grand Slam if no one from the Americas or from Russia is allowed to attend. That wouldn't feel like a normal sort of world-class event like it might otherwise. So we'll see. And tennis people seem very eager to have things go on, but it's an uphill battle all the time. And we saw with Djokovic just how quickly things can get derailed.
And there are large parts of America where the virus is still running riot. And while New York, it seems, is over its peak right now, have there been many concerns expressed by the European players or from players outside of America about travelling to New York for US Open?
Yeah, absolutely. And people, I think, fairly see New York as the epicenter of the virus in the U.S., and it was certainly the hardest hit city first. And in the world, it was one of the biggest cities that took the hardest blows from the COVID spread. And I understand fully the players being reluctant to come to the city so quickly after this pandemic and pretend like everything is normal. There would be in a bubble and everything, but even just to come to the city and be around the city, however briefly, would be discomforting for players, and I understand that. And so, but at the same time, relative to the U.S., New York is doing better, as you allude. There's lots of states which tried to reopen earlier and to get back to life as normal, which are now paying a pretty high price in terms of positive tests, in terms of hospitalizations, whether it's Florida, Texas, California, Arizona, a bunch of states that are currently spiking now. The U.S. is not doing itself any favors by doing what Novak did to bring it back to him again, by acting like things are okay before they are, or even just knowing people are not taking things as serious as they should be with masks or distancing or whatever else.
Are there any more of these sort of side events and side tours planned by players over the next few weeks?
Well, there's one that's still going on that's in France. It's the Ultimate Tennis Showdown that's being held at Patrick Mouratoglou, who's Serena Williams' coach. His academy in southern France is holding this event, and their event looks very different. They're having no fans in the stands, players not shaking hands and things like that, and coaches sitting apart from each other wearing masks and things like that. So they're taking more precautions, and I think they're having the third weekend of their event this next upcoming weekend. It's a little bit of concern because Dominic Thiem, who played the first Adria Tour stop, is one of the players now involved in the French event, and so he's tested negative. Thiem has tested negative a couple times already, but hoping that he's not just incubating the virus for it to come out later. A negative test doesn't mean you're not carrying it in some form, unfortunately. So that event's still ongoing. And then there's also a women's event that's starting this week in Charleston, South Carolina, and where that tournament normally would be. It's an April tournament that got postponed, and now they're doing an empty stands event of their own down in Charleston, some sort of women's team event they've popped up there.
All right. Thanks a lot for taking the call, Ben.
For sure, Nathan. Thank you.
Ben Rothenburg there, writer for the New York Times and host of the NCR Tennis podcast, on the news that Novak Djokovic, the world number one, has tested positive for COVID-19. In the Premier League, it's still scoreless between Leicester City and Brighton. There's 3 minutes left at the King Power Stadium. Aaron Connolly, the Galway striker, has gone off in the last few minutes for Glen Murray. He won a penalty for Brighton in the first half, but Kasper Schmeichel saved Neil Maupay's penalty kick. There is another game to come this evening as well. At 8:15, it is Spurs against West Ham in a London derby. The teams are in for Tottenham with Hugo Lloris in goals, a back four of Aurier, Sanchez, Dyer and Davies. In midfield, it's Sissoko and the returning Dele Alli, and in front of them, Lucas Moura, Giovanni Lo Celso and Heung-min Son playing in behind Harry Kane. And for West Ham, Fabianski in goals, a back four of Fredericks, Balbuena, Diop and Cresswell. In midfield, it's Rice, Soucek and Noble, with Bowen and Fornells either side of Mikel Antonio. So that coming up at 8:15. Kevin Kilban will be with us on the Football Show to run through some of the interesting stories of the weekend in the Premier League. So that is us for the moment. We have Alan Quinlan's How's the Head coming up after 8 o'clock, and we'll take a quick break.
Off the Ball on News Talk.
Rediscover the joy of driving with a Volkswagen Assurance Plan. Enjoy our flexible and supportive 202 offers, like PCP finance from 0% APR, purchase contributions of up to €2,000 and payment deferrals. We even guarantee the minimum future value of your Volkswagen. Search Volkswagen 202 today. Finance provided by way of hire purchase agreement from Volkswagen Financial Services Ireland and subject to lending criteria. Terms and conditions apply. Visit volkswagen.ie/202.